Recently, I've been doing a lot of research into Nintendo's producers, and there's a lot more content to come expanding on some of my conclusions. But I put out two videos which look at the implications for specific series already. One is on Wario Land, and the other is on Kid Icarus. It actually now seems to me plausible, that is, not flat out likely, but not unthinkable either, that both of these franchises could return primarily due to the presence of some senior figures at the top of Nintendo who have been quiet for a while. However, following the same line of thinking, I don't think these are the only franchises that could be primed for a return in the coming years. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that I know who would actually be the day-to-day developers of any of these games. Nobody really saw Acquire coming as the developers for Mario and Luigi Brothership, and the Donkey Kong Bonanza team was mostly a brand new group building on the footprint of the pre-2020 build from the core Odyssey team. But whether it's a new development partner, an old reliable team, or a group internal to the company, Nintendo will somehow find its way to revive franchises that it thinks have merit and thinks may have a future. Another Code, Advance Wars, Rhythm Heaven, Tomodachi Life, even Clubhouse Games. There are any number of long dormant franchises that have returned in recent years. These are the ones that I think are closer to returning than most, by which I mean at least one retail release, which might include a remake or remaster of a prior title. The list also includes a few I've tipped before, but which I now have a lot more grounding based on months more time looking into the credits. Without further ado then, let's look at these franchises. Number 1, Fossil Fighters. I covered this in a video last year, but I'm now actually a fair bit more optimistic than I was even back then. This DS and 3DS series bowed out in 2014 with the poorly reviewed Fossil Fighter Frontier, and its main developer Red Entertainment is hardly likely to be mounting another series anytime soon. I thought for a long time that this would be it for dear old Fossil Fighters, but then I noticed that a certain Genki Okota has recently been promoted. This man is practically RPG royalty at Nintendo, being one of the directors on such titles as Xenoblade Chronicles, Fire Emblem Awakening, Xenoblade Chronicles X, Fire Emblem Fates, Fire Emblem Echoes, Shadows of Valentia, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Fire Emblem Three Houses, and Xenoblade Chronicles 3. However, with the apparent retirement from Nintendo of longtime producer Hitoshi Yamagami, Yokota has stepped up to producer, and while he's mostly still associated with Xenoblade and Fire Emblem, he also shepherded Bayonetta 3. Still, among Yokota's contributions to these major RPG franchises, he also was the director for the first two Fossil Fighters games, although he didn't seem to be involved in the ill-fated 3DS threequel. It strikes me that if there were going to be a producer with an interest in unearthing some bodacious Cretaceous gameplay, it would be Yokota. Now, would Nintendo back his play for bringing back Fossil Fighters? I think there's a lot of reasons to think that they would. The franchise has had 3 entries in a short number of years, and the concept is just delicious. It will be a step up to bring the franchise to the Switch from its humble handheld roots, and the game would require a bigger budget than has likely been accorded to other handheld series such as Rhythm Heaven and even Advance Wars. However, it strikes me that this is a series with a far greater potential than most out of Nintendo's older franchises. Dinosaurs are eternally popular, and collecting RPGs are huge, in Japan especially. The character designs are on point, and this feels like the kind of series that Nintendo could put some effort into nurturing, much as they'd kept Fire Emblem and Xenoblade going during periods of lower sales. Now, they wouldn't be able to rely on Red Entertainment, who even on the previous versions needed a lot of support from external studios Artsync and M2. But all 3 of these teams remain in the broader Nintendo orbit, and if the company were to gather a bigger team to work on the series, it feels like there's the capacity for either a smaller scale remounting of the original DS game, perhaps a 1+2 pack in the manner of Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp, or even a full-fledged 4th title in the series. In fact, I'd even point to a potential developer for the series, although this is a really long-shot territory. Intelligent Systems have 2 broad groupings, one working on Fire Emblem and occasionally Advance Wars, and the other working on Paper Mario and WarioWare. However, when I did the credits deep dive of Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, it was very clear that a significant number of developers from 2020's Paper Mario and the Origami King didn't make the jump across. And even factoring in that we got two WarioWare titles in the early 2020s, when usually in a similar period we might only have one, it still seems there is potential for there to be another team working on something. Given Yokota's previous connections with Intelligent Systems through his extensive work on Fire Emblem, it seems like this might be a good fit, although in absolute terms, this specific eventuality is clearly a huge long shot. Number 2. Nintendogs. This huge DS and 3DS series was shepherded by EPD9, the creators of Mario Kart, and while Mario Kart World clearly took some considerable time, EPD9 do have a solid track record of doing double duty around the launch window of new systems, with both 2017 and 2011 having two games from them. More than that, the director of the last Nintendogs title, Yasuyuki Oyagi, received only a special thanks credit for Mario Kart World, and although he did seem to be more involved in the Booster Course Pass, that doesn't seem like 8.5 years worth of work. Oyagi is very likely working on something, and while there's a huge range of possibilities for what that could be, including a new franchise since EPT9 also produced ARMS, Nintendogs feels conspicuous by its absence on the Switch in any event, given its past popularity, and I could definitely see this being a project at least supervised by Oyagi, even if he's working on a separate project entirely as well. I should note that there were leaked patents for what appears to be a Nintendogs mobile game as well, but this was some time ago, and it's possible that any project might not be for the Switch family of systems, although if Nintendo want to maximize its use of all its core franchises, then surely one of the dogs that didn't bark in the nighttime is the Nintendogs franchise. Number 3. Hotel Dusk. When Another Code Recollection was announced for January 2024, the obvious title to follow it up was always going to be Hotel Dusk. Also developed by the now defunct Sing, and for the DS, just like the first Another Code game, it seems like a perfect partner title, and the relevant people are still there. Shinya Saito at Nintendo had his earliest credit on the first Another Code game, and since then has worked on many titles, but all the Another Code and Hotel Dusk games are among them. Meanwhile, ex-Sing employees Rika Suzuki and Taisuke Kanasaki were helming Recollection, and neither has had another credit since, suggesting that Arc System Works may well have given them leeway to move straight on to another project. Now, there are some caveats to this. For one thing, we don't know how well Another Code Recollection actually performed, although we can guess that it didn't meet 1 million copies since Nintendo has never reported on the figures. It's possible that it was just under 1 million by the time 2024's financial year ended and picked up a few hundred thousands more since, so it could have peaked over 1 million. I've seen Nintendo pushing it in sales and other events since. It's conceivable, therefore, that at the absolute top end, it settled out at the low 1 million, but realistically it was probably well under that. Shigeru Miyamoto has spoken in the past about 2 million being the target for new games, but Another Code is clearly a more niche affair, and being a low seller didn't seem to stop Famicom Detective Club getting a relatively high profile, although still under 1 million selling, sequel. Another consideration is that if Nintendo do decide to go to the effort of recommissioning Arc System Works, would they be better doubling down on Another Code by making a modern version of that game? As much as I love the Famicom Detective Club remakes, and I think the girl who stands behind is actually a better overall mystery than Emio, the improvements in gameplay for Emio the Smiling Man over the previous titles were huge, and a lot of that I'm sure is because they were making a game for a new system, as opposed to just transposing a title designed for much older hardware, and they could work within the footprint of the remake using resources created for the prior game. Furthermore, Nintendo is making a push of trying to appeal to young women, and Ashley may be a better figurehead for that strategy than Kyle from Hotel Dusk. Finally, though, writer Rika Suzuki has had credit since the late 80s, suggesting that she's likely in her 60s already, and certainly she doesn't seem to have been working in games much prior to Another Code Recollection. In an interview with the Game Preservation Society in 2022, she noted that she felt that Hotel Dusk was a little bit of a curveball from what might have been expected to be her second pitch, another Code 2, and so in this case it opens the possibility that if the door to Nintendo is open once again, she might similarly decide on a project we might not expect, whether a quite different take on another code or even a wholly original franchise. I think that there are three ways this could go, however, and two of them lead to Hotel Dusk sooner or later. Path 1 is that Nintendo were displeased with the performance of another code, in which case I can't see why they'd think another commission from a franchise that's probably even less high profile would do any better. Path 2 is that another code did well enough that Nintendo are happy to commission a Hotel Dusk collection of remakes of the first two titles on the same basis as another code recollection. They might not be huge sellers, but they'll do well enough, especially given the entire life of the Switch and Switch 2 to sell. The third path is that they continue with another code, but if they're pleased enough to do that, then it opens up the likelihood that they will eventually chance their arm with Hotel Dusk, perhaps a little bit later in the Switch 2 generation. At any rate, while all of these are relative long shots, I can definitely see a path to seeing another Hotel Dusk game. Number 4. Style Savvy. This is an interesting one. From being a fairly successful 3DS series with multiple entries, it didn't make the jump to Switch, and the team behind it, Sin Sophia, actually moved over to Marvelous to create their own spiritual successor, Fashion Dreamer. I haven't played any of the games, but people in the comment sections of these videos have suggested that despite the superficial similarity, Fashion Dreamer wasn't really matchy-matchy with what style-savvy players were after, and certainly the sales don't appear to have followed suit. Marvelous released a sales update in February which suggested that Fashion Dreamer had sold 500,000 copies, but still hadn't met its sales targets, and the target was actually lowered due to being set too high. Meanwhile, Sin Sophia are hardly strangers to Nintendo, having worked on Fitness Boxing 3, which Nintendo published themselves, the first hint of a thawing of their relationship since they parted ways after the last Style Savvy game in 2017. What happened? It's obviously quite difficult to say with any certainty, but my guess is that in 2017, Nintendo might not have been ready to pull the trigger on a new Style Savvy for the Nintendo Switch. After all, this was the early days of the system, and while its initial sales had been high off the outsized success of Zelda Breath of the Wild, Nintendo still had the prospect of eking out 2 years of ports and fairly small-scale titles. Meanwhile, Sin Sophia themselves were a small team, 73 people as of June 2025, which isn't all that different from 10 years ago. For them to scale up to produce something much bigger, they would need a significant injection of resources. I suspect that Marvelous were able to offer this to them, and the reason that I think this is that the Fashion Dreamer credits are absolutely huge. A full 12 minutes, with the Reddit threads existing saying that the credits are longer than the actual game. If this was the vision that Sin Sophia had for the future of games in this style, well, good on them, but I can also understand why Nintendo might have thought that they would be better off opting out. But if Marvelous were modelling their anticipated sales on the success of the Style Savvy franchise, whose first title was a rounding error of 3 million units sold on the Nintendo DS when last reported, it's not a surprise that the 500,000 worldwide sales of Fashion Dreamer bitterly disappointed them. Is this enough to break their relationship with Sin Sophia off and leave Marvelous Fashion Dreamer less? Well, maybe. I certainly can't imagine that a sequel in that series will get a budget anywhere near as high, while Nintendo are now in a very different position. Yuri Hattori directed the previous titles, and presumably the longtime Nintendo producer will be interested in returning to that series again. Then again, it's not necessarily the case that Nintendo would see this as the best route forward for a game of this genre. In the 2000s, Nintendo was very much about reaching out to women and older gamers, and used lots of non-IP related games, such as the Wii series, to do this. But now Nintendo has a different objective and is drawing people into the franchise. It's always struck me that a style game in the world of Animal Crossing could be a huge seller. I mean, any Animal Crossing spin-off post-2020 has to be a fairly safe bet long term, and while Hattori's network programmer credit doesn't suggest she's exactly helming the Able Sisters spin-off, if she spent potentially a couple of years on the Animal Crossing team and hasn't been on a new game since, then there's at least a decent chance that she's quite involved in making the animals a bit more style savvy. In this case, Sophia may feel that they've missed the boat, at least to do something in accordance with their own designs. Now, having said that, I suspect that an Animal Crossing style game wouldn't appeal to style savvy fans particularly more than Fashion Dreamer, as most people with a passion for fashion aren't thinking about how to dress up dogs and elephants. Well, not exclusively anyway. It's also not clear what Hattori has been doing at Nintendo since, and if she's involved in another project. Even if she's passionate about style savvy, it may be that her schedule and Sophia's simply won't line up. Still, assuming that Sophia's break with Nintendo was motivated by finances and not some deep rift in their working relationship, a reunion eventually has to seem fairly likely, and with Nintendo being quite traditional in terms of keeping on the slate of old series that worked, I actually still think Style Savvy could return. And of course, franchises 5 and 6 have to be the ones that have their own videos dedicated to them, these being Kid Icarus and Wario Land. Well, those videos are pinging up on the screen right now, so if you haven't seen those, please do check them out. For this video, though, it just remains for me to say thank you so much for watching, and I will look forward to seeing you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.